Hi, this is Raj Christian, and this is my podcast known as The Barbarians. And you can find my work on Substack, Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. This podcast today is being recorded, and it's going to tell the story of Donald Trump and another man by the name of Caligula. The title of it is Trump's Post-2024 American Authoritarianism Drift. This is the story of two men, born both with wealth and privilege, but in their world, they were not welcomed, even though separated by 2,000 years. Caligula, or more commonly known as Jeremias, was the name of a Roman emperor. He was the youngest Roman emperor in the history of the Roman Empire. His father was one of the greatest generals in the history of the Roman army. His name was General Germanicus. Germanicus, unfortunately, died when Caligula was a young boy, and he became the adopted son of the current emperor, Tiberius. He and his mother were moved from their home on the border of what we now call Germany and Italy, back to the watching eyes of Tiberius. His mother rejected Tiberius's rule over her family, and she became annoyed with his favoritism towards Caligula, or Germanicus. Eventually, she and the other members of her family were all exiled to an island off the coast of Italy. But the boy known as Caligula was kept under the watchful eye of Tiberius's adoptive father. Donald Trump was the son of one of New York's wealthiest real estate investors and developers. Trump was taught to use the media by his father and take advantage of them. And in the end, the media will always be a source as his survivor and allow him to move into new areas. Eventually, we even create a TV show that was long running. But even though both men were considered 2,000 years difference in their lifetimes, both men would develop a basic concept of a disdain and even a hatred for the very countries that they would be rulers over. Caligula would soon take over power once the aged Tiberius passed away. And once he did, he would show the Roman Senate his contempt for them. He humiliated them with orgies with their wives and daughters. He used lavish banquets and parties with the aristocracy, and he excluded those senators that he didn't feel were supportive of him. Caligula embraced cruelty. He wanted retribution. He wanted to make those who he didn't trust and those who didn't support him pay the price. As the emperor, he could have people executed without any due process. Donald Trump in 2016 became elected as President of the United States. He would defeat Hillary Clinton. who represented the democratic lifestyle. She was affluent, she was wealthy, and the wife of a former president. But that would be her downfall, because she always felt that Trump had nothing but scallywags and lowlifes that represented him. That would become the group that would be known as MAGA, his supporters, Make America Great Again, the people who wore the red hats. But despite allegations against Trump for sexual abuse and all the other criminal factors that they thought was wrong with him to even run for president, Trump would later succeed and defeat Hillary Clinton and become the president in 2016. However, just by becoming president didn't elevate him in the eyes of the world. He still was seen as an outsider, someone not truly capable of being the most powerful man in the entire world as president of the United States. He found that once he became president, there were those who were even in his party and those who were even in his cabinet were there to maintain the guardrails that we call democracy. Trump resented this, but he had no way of changing it. He knew no way of changing it. In Rome, they feared the wrath of Caligula. He would use his guards to assassinate those who spoke against him. And the Roman Senate, which was known to have a voice and have some means of control over the Roman Empire, now was down to a very silent, quiet voice. They all walked tepidly around Caligula for fear of being called a traitor and then executed. During Trump's first time in office in 2016, he ran up against the problem of what was known as the Russia investigation, which, although it was proven that there was Russian interference in our election, and there were people who were connected to Trump who supported them and the Russians' attempt to interfere, he was never tried, although he would later be impeached, but never was removed from office. It was also during his time that he would face something even worse called the COVID virus. He tried to hide, he tried to cover up many aspects of the virus, but he couldn't. The virus was too endemic to the people of the United States. He was angered, and he fought bitterly against the medical establishment. He felt they were not on his side. But fortunately, he and others were able to put together a working format that began to develop a vaccine against the COVID virus. But Trump didn't forget this, and he still held a bitter grudge against the medical community and also against the establishment that was developed at that time. During his first term in office, MAGA, which supported Trump, grew in power. Those who did not follow his rules, be they Republicans or Democrats, faced everything from physical threats to being primaried, so that they could never ever retain their office. Trump supported these actions, and he continued to try to push against the nation's rules. Eventually, Trump would face a second attempt at impeaching him. But during his time in office, Trump developed a greater level of hatred and developed a greater plan. He knew he needed to run again. And so When the 2020 election came around against Joe Biden, he threw everything he had at defeating Biden. But in the end, America had grown tired. They had grown tired of his antagonism. They had grown tired of his hatred. And he would subsequently lose the election. But in losing the election, this became Trump's greatest enigma. The enigma that he was literally summarily beaten, although he never ever gave up on the notion that he actually won the election. In fact, on January 6th, he would send many of his followers, hundreds of them, down to the Capitol to do everything they could to block the completion of the election. Police officers died in the process. Others were injured. And the Capitol of the United States had been stormed like it never had been stormed in any of its history since the country's inception. Trump would later leave the office in disgrace. He never participated in the inauguration of Joe Biden, who won the election. He left angry and vanquished, determined to get retribution. And that's really what this podcast is about, his mindset towards retribution. Over the years while Biden was in office, Trump began putting together a powerful organization of MAGA, but also people who would come to join him, people who would come to be a part, people who would be utterly loyal to him, who would never question him, who would do anything that he commanded and never try to impose guardrails on him. But most of all, that there would be people who would work with him to gain retribution against the nation, as well as those people who made up the government of the United States. Be they Republicans or be they Democrats, be they law enforcement officers, be they lawyers, be they actors, be they people of any political factor or any artistic factor, they became Donald Trump's enemy. And he was determined to destroy that aspect. So he and his followers developed a plan known as 2025. They sought out to break and destroy all of the government institutions, education, healthcare, veterans, Social Security. They were all listed. They were all seen as targets for Trump to attack. He cut the staffs. He cut their funding. Even those fundings that affected foreign governments like AID, he was out to destroy them. He put a man who had helped him in the election, Elon Musk, a billionaire, in charge of the program. It would be known as Doge. Doge systematically and technically went about following up with these cuts. All the while, he told the American people that these cuts would be used and the finances would come back to them. The savings would come back to them. But the fact of the matter is, none of that occurred. None of that happened at all during his realm. But the big story, the big plan, was to use immigration. Hundreds of thousands of people have been round up and without any due process, even those who had been peaceful citizens in the United States. They were often handcuffed, their families were broken, and they were sent to a foreign prison. In many cases, there was no due process of law. And even if there was, even if the courts intervened in any way, Donald Trump was determined to make sure that there would be no process. He defied the courts. He felt that he was untouchable. He knew that at that point, no seated president could have been charged of a crime, even if he left office. And so he continued on with his autocracy. He was determined to breach and break every possible aspect of what America was known as democracy. America, the greatest democracy in the history of the United world. was now in the process of being slowly dissolved in less than 1 year. Donald Trump attacked the Justice Department, and he knew that he had to make sure that there would be no one within it. The FBI purged out hundreds of agents who had been a part of it. Agents, lawyers, scientists were all removed. Not to make it better, but because they weren't loyal to Trump. Members of the military, leaders within the Joint Chiefs of Staff, were also purged. They went after women and minorities. They tried to do everything they could to eradicate any aspect of their leadership and any aspect of their involvement or anything that they had done that had made the United States military a better organization for the people of the United States. But Trump didn't care about this. Even our allies were in fear. NATO slowly quivered, worried about making anything that would cause Trump any irritation. There was always a fear that he was going to pull out of NATO. During this time, the war in Ukraine raged on. Trump would brag and tell everyone that he could solve the war in 1 day. But the reality was, even despite his so-called relationship with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, he was unable to do that. And in the process, thousands and thousands of lives continued to be lost in that war. He threatened our neighbors that surround the United States. Canada, he claimed, could be the 51st state. Mexico was told it could even physically become a part of the United States. Even Greenland was told that the United States had the capacity by force to take it away and make it a part of our country, even though it's a part of NATO. Trump didn't care. And his supporters believed he was capable of doing it. They promoted his sense of authoritarianism. He attacked the universities and colleges, and where they were told that they either succumb to what he wanted, or he would decrease any ability for them to receive funding from the federal government. Law firms who had defended, who would work with people who were opposition to him and his government, were suddenly forced to pay him millions of dollars in the hopes to keep from losing government contracts. Even the media, which had been his nemesis, now found itself threatened. There were employees, members within the media, who actually were fired simply because they fell out of favor with Donald Trump. And so now, everyone was living in fear. Those who were wealthy, billionaires, succumbed to him. Why? Because despite even their wealth, they knew that Trump could impose deals and even cause legal efforts against them. So they lived in fear as well. He imposed tariffs against our foreign allies and other nations. And other nations responded in kind and imposed tariffs back against the United States. Suddenly, the American economy started to fall deeper and deeper. The supposed tariffs that were supposed to bring jobs and money back to the United States had failed. But Trump didn't care. He basically told the American people they just needed to suck it up. They just needed to accept the fact. But then, as usual, something happened. The American people, not led by the Democratic Party, but by grassroots levels, decided to push back at every level. Both in the media as well as the people. They pushed back against his immigration rules. They pushed back against the things that he had done. And they were determined not to let his autocracy dissolve the democracy. Caligula believed the same thing. He even threatened to move Rome, the capital of Rome, to Alexandria in Egypt, as a means to control the Senate and control those who didn't support him. Eventually, the senators came to a conclusion. They had only one option. They had to stop him. They chose to have him assassinated. And so he would be. The Roman Praetorian Guards, with the help of the Roman Empire, joined together and they killed Caligula in an assassination. And while no one would think and would want to see an American president assassinated, it showed that authoritarianism can be pushed back against. There were hundreds of thousands of Americans who decided to walk the streets of the United States. And slowly, the legal proceedings and legal systems pushed back as well. There were those who went into the court system and sued the Trump administration. And even some of the things that had been a part of Trump, like the Jeffrey Epstein case, started to be coming to the surface. They joined together against him to force him to produce the evidence about a conspiracy that he had used as a means to bring more and more of the MAGA followers together. But now Trump was weary. Trump was worried that he himself could be linked to all of this. Now he sits with this sword of Damocles hanging over his head. He sits living in fear of what may be found. Starting this week, more and more evidence may come to the surface. It may point a finger at a man who was the friend of a man like Jeffrey Epstein. And slowly, you're seeing emotionally and mentally that he's melting down. He's starting to fall apart. But the war isn't over, and we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go to bring back our democracy and rid us of this autocracy. But it can be done. It'll take all of us. And you and me together, we can find a way to make America a country, a nation of laws, and nations that works for the best of all the people in this country. This is Raj Christian. I hope you will read more of my work on Substack and read my articles as well. Subscribe, and you can find me on Substack. And you can also find me on Spotify and also Apple. I'll be talking to you down the road. I'll be looking for you soon. Thanks.